Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. This is day 4 of the series I'm doing right now. And what I'm talking about is the basic fears, 6 basic fears from Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, and how they connect with burnout. So we've talked about fear of, let's see, about poverty, fear of criticism, fear of ill health, fear of loss of someone is today, fear of old age, fear of death. So today we're looking at fear of the loss of love of someone or from someone. And one thing I'll say actually, because when I was looking at this and I was expanding on it and doing a bit of research, etc., I realized how much is attached to this topic. And so I'm going to give you a trigger warning. If you are someone who tends to experience have issues with abandonment, things like that, this may be a little bit triggering for you because we're talking about that today. Um, it's a funny one because it's definitely something that I've experienced for various reasons, and I think it's something that came up in therapy that I realized that part of the way I am, which is a curse and a blessing, is my need for validation from other people. And I had to really work through that because what it meant was if I felt like I wasn't going to be, I would act in the way that I assumed that would get me that response from fear of loss of that person. But then what ends up happening is you don't become your true self that way, and they don't get to see your true self. And so if you're building a relationship, if you're building a team, for example, you end up relying on a mask of you. And the problem with a mask, and I've mentioned this before, is a mask takes effort to keep on. You've got to pretend to be a person consistently. And then the question is, one, why do we feel like we need to use that mask? If we think about it objectively, if we feel like we need to put on a mask to be liked, then is that the environment that we want to be in the first place? And then two, if we feel like we need to put on a mask to be liked, what is it about us that makes us feel that way? Because we may not need to put on that mask. Taking off that mask could actually be the greatest thing for our friendships, relationships, colleagues. But we may never know if we keep this mask on. They might even like us more. One about market, just generally connection in general, is it really works when people allow themselves to be vulnerable, to allow themselves to risk losing somebody effectively. Because when you risk losing someone and then they don't leave, that builds even stronger relationships. And if you're too scared of that to be able to be authentic to yourself, then you might find yourself losing people anyway, because that the cracks will show. You can't keep on that mask forever. You can't pretend forever. At some point, it will show. And then the real you would come out. And then people would quite rightly be like, where is this coming from? And then when you say, this is who I am, they'll be like, oh, well, that's not the person who's been displayed to us thus far, which can cause all kinds of different issues. So we're talking about that today. The fear of loss of love of or from someone can stem from past experiences of abandonment, like I mentioned before, rejection, or attachment issues. Now, one of the things that comes up in therapy, and when you go to therapy, there's this cliche almost that you go to them and they say, oh, talk to me about your relationship with your parents. And as I've grown up and looked into it a lot deeper, it actually does make sense. And it's one of the reasons why it's one of the first things that someone might ask. You're in your developmental stages as a child. That's when you're learning how the world works. That's when you understand the rules of engagement. In the same way as how you learn the natural laws, things like gravity, etc., you're learning the behavioral laws, cultural laws. You're making if-then assumptions. If I do this, then I get that. And that becomes a law. You understand that to be the case. And unfortunately, as you're in your developmental stage, until you become like a teenager-ish, you think everything is about you, and rightly so. I saw this quote that said that um, children are the biggest narcissists, and it's because in terms of your psychological development, you haven't got to the point yet where you realize that everyone else has their own life that revolves around themselves. Up until that realization, you assume everything is about you. So if your parents break up, you assume it's about you. If someone cries, you assume it's about you. If someone laughs, you assume it's about you. Everything that happens, you attach it to yourself because you haven't yet got to the point of understanding that the world doesn't revolve around you and other people have their own reactions and lives and mindsets and thoughts, etc. Now, the problem with this is when it comes to things like fear of abandonment, rejection, and attachment issues, is if you think the world revolves around you, if within that stage of development something happens, a parent leaves, or you get more attention from one parent or the other, or you don't get any attention from that parent at all, even though they're living within the house, or you move house to a completely different country and have to start again, or all these kind of things that we don't necessarily think as, but the children pick up on and internalize. So it's not just that they observe it, because we say children are sponges. If you think about the concept of a sponge, the water doesn't just stop on the surface, it gets absorbed into the actual sponge itself. And children are like that. They'll see things, which means the water will land on their surface, and they observe them, but then they absorb them as well. They observe and absorb. And then basically what happens is they assume that they are that thing. If you tell them they're bad, they will assume that they are a bad human. If you tell them they're good, they'll assume they're a good human. If you validate them, then they would feel full from it. If they do something expecting validation and you don't give them the validation they thought they wanted, then they will assume certain things, right? They'll paste those connections together. They'll either think they don't deserve the validation, which is why they didn't get it, even though you might have been doing 101 things and you might not even have noticed yet. There's a lot of things that happen in that developmental stage, and so us as adults are carrying all of that. There's this quote where it talks about the inner child, the inner teenager, and the inner adult. The inner child needs love, effectively. The inner teenager needs justice. The inner adult needs peace, right? And you need to be serving all three. So then how does this relate back to burnout? Let's assume you're going through your life and preempting relationships, preempting. So you are trying to avoid danger, trying to avoid loss because of fear of it. And so, like I said, you put on a mask, or you do things that may not be natural to you. You go against your beliefs, your values, all that kind of stuff, just to be able to appease what you think other people will need, to appease other people, right? You do what you think they want you to do. And then over time, that becomes stressful for you because you've constantly got to pretend. And then you get the other side of the coin. The dichotomy is you've got to put this mask on because you think that's what will get you acceptance. But then you get to the point where removing it would risk losing the people in the first place, right? So the fear can lead to clinginess, codependency, and a constant need of reassurance in relationships and even in business. And I pointed out in business because if you imagine, let's say you are in a team, and what I sometimes see is that people who have ideas don't say anything because they're scared of rejection, for example, right? They're scared of looking stupid. They're scared of fear of loss of respect from people, for example, right? As well as love. And so they don't say anything. Or when they do say anything, it's just bigging up everyone else. Oh, yeah, that was a great idea. Yeah, I think we should do that. Yeah. They become yes people. And what ends up happening then is that no one actually benefits from that. You don't get the critique you need to improve. They don't get the critique they need to improve. You don't get to speak your truth, which means that you grow resentful, maybe towards them because you feel like, oh, I should have said that and I didn't. But then more resentful towards yourself because you know that there was something you wanted to say and then you didn't. All of that builds stress within the body. And what we know about burnout is it's stress, it's cortisol building up within the body. When it goes unmanaged for a prolonged period of time, it becomes burnout. You start to see the symptoms: emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, where you don't feel like yourself, you're going robot mode, you're just going through the motions, and things like reduced sense of personal accomplishment. Anything you do, you don't feel like is worth it. You feel like you're worth less, right? Or you feel like you're insignificant, shall we say? Everyone else is doing better than you. Imposter syndrome, all of those things. It can result, like I said, in emotional exhaustion, anxiety, and relationship dynamics. Anxiety about relationship dynamics and conflict. You've heard of this idea about fear of conflict. What are we fearful of? Is a question I would like to ask you. For those of you who say you have a fear of conflict, is it the conflict itself, or is it what you perceive to come after the conflict? Is it the loss of the person? Is it the loss of respect? Is it violence? Like what exactly is the fear of conflict? Once we understand what the fear is, we can actually go back to find out why we believe that fear would become reality. Because if we don't believe it to be real or a real threat, then it wouldn't be a fear, right? So what have we learned growing up that makes us believe that this will be a logic, like an actual outcome if I was to approach this issue? And then deal with that root cause. Okay, I feel like if I tell them what I really feel, they won't like me anymore. Okay, let's deal with that. What would happen if they don't like me anymore? They don't like me anymore. And if they don't like me anymore for something I said the truth about, maybe that is actually something that's going to serve us both. Maybe. Maybe if they don't like me anymore, I get to learn a little something about them. The only thing is, like, on the other side of that is the shadow side, because there is grief attached. And I'm talking about that today as well. Grief is not just in terms of losing someone to death, for example. I think that's probably the most common concept of grief. But grief can also be loss of a thing. It could be loss of a future that you thought you would have, or an experience, or an opportunity. It could be loss of someone who you used to be. Going through life throws us all kinds of things. Like after we deal with certain things, we grow, we change into a different version of ourselves, and we can lose a version of ourselves. If we have children, we're no longer that carefree person who can just do what we want without any kind of thinking. Now we have to think about another person. And so you lose a little element of your individual you, that single you, right? It can be grief of a loss of all sorts, right? So we also got to deal with that. Like, how do we deal with it? And one of the things I would encourage, and I might talk about this another day, because I feel like grief is one of the big things that can cause burnout. If we don't deal with it, it can cause all kinds of stress with us, is how we deal with grief. Like there's whole process of grief recovery, right? And I feel like in the West, we don't necessarily do that too tough. When people are going through grief, people just disappear. They're like, oh, I want to give them space. When back home in Sierra Leone, that's when the people come to you. For 40 days and 40 nights, you'll have ceremonies, you have processes. And that's for loss of a person, but also just in general. Like, oh no, I know you're going through something. Let me come over. I'll bring some food. We don't even have to talk. I'll just be in your space. It's that kind of thing. And I think that's something personally I miss, because when you're going through grief alone, it can help. It can exacerbate it. So if you're going through it and you're wondering to yourself, why aren't I functional at work? How come I keep snapping at my parents? How come I keep snapping at my friends and family? It might be because you haven't dealt with the emotions that come from the loss of love from someone, the loss of a person completely, you know. Um, Thinking about that, because a lot of the times with burnout, it's coming from an accumulation of undealt with stress. And one of the things that you can find that the accumulation is made of is look at what your triggers have been over the last 3 months, 3 years, 3 decades. What are the things that have been happening that you haven't dealt with? Those are the things that will probably need to be dealt with. Whether you go to therapy, whether you face them, whether you journal them, whether you meditate, whether you pray, whatever it is, dealing with them can help relieve that stress, right? The stressor. Okay. Running away from it, hiding under a bush is never going to help. Trying to ignore it and pretend you're okay is never going to help. Sometimes we have to face it. And that's one of the reasons why people don't get coaches or therapists, is because they're like, oh, what will be uncovered if I do that? But then think about it the other way. What if you don't do that and that thing is still there? It's like having a monster in the house that just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And all of a sudden now you're at a point where you can only really use the toilet because that's the only place it hasn't consumed yet. Now you can't use the house at all because it has taken over. If you're okay with that, then continue. If you want your house back, face it. And often the moment you face it, it starts to shrink. You start to realize, actually, this is what it's made of. Before, it was just this esoteric feeling. This is something that was just consuming me all the time. But now you start to break it down into individual components. You can deal with them one by one, which can allow you to actually progress, which can now allow you to recover from burnout, recover from grief, sadness, recover from anxiety, all of those things. Yeah. It can also lead to people-pleasing behavior. I mentioned that, becoming a yes person. But then what happens when you do that is you also neglect your self-care. You put other people's thoughts and needs above your own. So you neglect yourself. You know that you need to take time off work, but you don't. You know you need to take sick leave because you're feeling ill, but you don't. You know you need to hydrate yourself, but you don't. You know you need to eat 3 times a day, but you don't. All those things you don't do because now you're thinking about something else. You're exhausted. You're thinking about other people's needs, and if you have £10, you give 7 of it to somebody else. All those things start to happen. Yeah, Ms. Lash, pleasure to have you here. Hope some of this is resonating with you. Um, just to finish off that thought, what ends up happening also is you sacrifice your personal boundaries. And one of the things that can happen, and I've talked about this before, when you sacrifice your personal boundaries for someone else, or to avoid conflict, or because you've lost love from someone, is that you become resentful towards yourself. And let me show you how that can work. Let's say you're experiencing something and you have the fear of loss of love from somebody, right? Or loss of respect from somebody, or loss of attention from somebody. And so you decide that, okay, I'm going to give them access to me, because if I give them access to me, they will love me more. They will give me more respect. They'll give me more of their time, etc. Which means that whenever they call, you pick up. Whenever they want to see you, you say yes. Whatever that is, right? And what happens is that 1 week becomes 1 hour a day, 2 hours a day, 3 hours a day. You start to be on the phone with them until the early hours of the morning, and you lose sleep, right? You start to lose your function because you're not giving yourself what you need, right? At work, you're instead of saying, no, I can't accept this, I'm already swamped, you say, yes, I know, get blurred. You start to accept more work. And then what happens is you think you're doing it for the best because, okay, if I do all this stuff, I'll prove to them how good I am and they'll give me that raise. But then what ends up happening is you take on so much, your quality starts to drop, and then start to make mistakes, right? You start to go to home still thinking about it, right? You start to lose your sleep because you're still trying to figure out how you're going to manage 4 projects when you're only meant to be handling 2, you know? And then you get back into work and you're scared to tell your manager that you're overwhelmed, even though the other people in your team are light on their feet. They don't have anything to do. And then you end up having a situation where not only is your performance low, but the performance of the team is low. And there's no reason, because all those people in your team could have taken up the slack with you, but you chose not to because you wanted that attention, that what's it called, that validation. You wanted to be seen in a certain kind of way, and now it's become self-destructive. Yeah, it's going to happen in all kinds of different ways. So what do we do about that? Let's say, for example, we do have a fear of, ooh, hey, what's going on? I'm not actually, yeah, come on now. Let's bring a guest in here. What I'll do is I'll bring you on. We'll share thoughts really quickly, and then I'll go back to regular programming. If you're still able to come online. Okay, maybe not. Cool. So what can we do about it? Let's say we're in a situation where we have a fear of love, loss of love, of or from someone. What do we do about it? There's 6 things I have here. Some of them might be, you might see coming already. Number 1 is practice self-love and self-compassion. I was in a space before, and they said self-care is the doing, self-love is the being. So you can do all your self-care all you like, but unless you go internally and figure out what those barriers actually are, you won't actually experience self-love. And I had a really close friend of mine who demonstrated this, because they said that they do all the self-care practices, but when it comes to their decisions, they're always the when it comes to their activities, where they can't even look at themselves in the mirror. The person who they see isn't someone they would like to spend time with, and they choose to spend time with other people because they don't want to spend time with themselves. And it was deep, but it was really important for me to hear someone say that, because I realized how big a difference is. The self care is very important, but it doesn't necessarily lead to self-love without doing some of the fundamental basics of compassion, of looking at your beliefs, facing your inner demons, all those kind of stuff, looking at the things that happen to you as and in your life, and letting go of certain things, all of the, trusting yourself, all of those things. Without that, self care can actually just be like putting a plaster on an open wound. It won't necessarily heal it. And so self-love and self-compassion is really important, because self-compassion, because you might see yourself acting in fear and choosing some stop of doing things and choosing someone else, and you beat yourself up about it. And that doesn't help at all. Yeah. It makes it worse, in fact. And so self-compassion is really important. Treat yourself how you would treat someone else who is going through the same thing you're going through right now. And then by doing that, you build resilience and emotional independence. One of the things I was thinking about with relationships, and I feel like at the moment there is this fear of, there's the fear of everything in terms of relationships, right? And I don't know if it's this younger generation or if it's the older ones as well. There's this, what do you bring to the table? Oh, marriage is just a legal entity, and I don't need anything I can do through. But one of the things I was thinking about is, it feels to me like a lot of that is coming from a space of fear. If you felt like you genuinely love someone, like I feel like when you experience real love, powerful love, you don't experience the same kinds of levels of fear. Fear kind of disappears because you have trust, you have interdependence, which is where I'm going with it. Like, you've got independence, where you feel like you do everything yourself and you don't need anything from anybody, which is great. But if that's the case, and it means that you don't create space for other people to share space with you, then it means that you're going towards an area of loneliness. You'll have surface level relationships, because for deep connection, some kind of connection between you two, if you're too independent and it becomes a wall, then that can become an issue that can actually end up what's what I'm looking for, harming you in the long run. Interdependence is when two people who are independent come together and they collaborate, right? So I'm not saying independence is bad, but I feel like there's a level after that, and it's used in business a lot. If you are, if you have a group of people who are independent, then they don't work together very well. Interdependence is like Formula One racing. When they pull into the pit stop, each of the individuals are so in tune with what they're doing individually. I'm the person who's changing the wheel, and I can trust that when I put my hands to the right or the left, the person who's meant to give me the next wheel is going to be there, right? So I don't even need to look. That's how interdependence looks like. You're a team who works together. Individually, you have your entity, but together, you have your whole. It's like the Gestalt theory, right? The whole or the parts are as great as each other, right? So that's where emotional interdependence I will talk about. All right. So number one in how to recover from the fear of love of someone is practicing self-love and self-compassion to build resilience and emotional independence, or interdependence, shall I say. Number two is seeking therapy or counseling to work through attachment issues and fear of abandonment. I mentioned that before, but this is huge. I feel like a lot of the time the things that we consider personality are often trigger um what's the word I'm looking for, trauma responses from childhood. So if you find yourself to be independent, if you have a attachment style which is um what's it called, anxious avoidant or any of those things, or secure, then often it's because of the way you were brought up and the experiences you had with, from your family, for example, from your friends, etc. And that can come up in your adulthood as just the way I am, when actually no, it's not. It's because of these experiences you had. And the moment you realize that, you can actually go to the root of that and deal with whatever open wound might still be there, which could help elevate you as a person. You might find that some of the cycles you keep going through, some of the same experiences you keep having with your work, with your friends, with your relationships, might be because you haven't dealt with some of the things you experienced growing up. And you know, I'm just angry. I'm just an angry person. I say what I like. Okay, cool. But actually, you're just rude, and that rudeness is because of those experiences you've had where you feel like as a child you never got the space to speak, and now you're overexerting yourself. Like, so there's always something behind it. But seeking therapy or counseling to work through attachment issues and fear of abandonment can really help, because then that means that that if someone, even if someone wants to go, even if someone wants to leave, you would be okay. The person that's left isn't, the identity of the person that's left after someone goes isn't based on the other person, it's based on you, right? Your identity is not based on what you can do for anybody else or who is in your network system. Your identity is based on you, who you are. Yes, Ricardo, what's going on, man? Welcome. Um, so yes, number three, in terms of things you can do to help recover from the fear of loss of somebody. And all of this is attached to burnout, because when you do feel any kind of fear, it brings that pressure within your body, which actually manifests as headaches, as emotional exhaustion, as all those things, and can hurtle you towards burnout over a long period of time if it's not dealt with. Number three is setting healthy boundaries in relationships and prioritizing your own well-being. I think that kind of speaks for itself, but really do, boundaries are key. What is the limit for you? And if you don't know what your boundaries are, pay attention to when you get triggered, when you get angry, when you feel something. Those are an indication that there might be a boundary there somewhere. And sometimes it's a boundary that we may not want to admit to ourselves. Okay, cool. I say yes. I said yes, but right now I don't feel comfortable. And so now that yes has turned to a no. But I need to communicate that as a boundary. We've gone a little bit further than I thought we were going to go. Okay, so okay, I've got this, this contract, and I said I'll be able to do all these changes, but now they're calling me at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning for adaptations to a proposal, And for me to be able to get them done, I need to lose all of my sleep to do that. No, I need to set a boundary. Okay, I said I wanted to spend time with this person because I want to get to know them, but now they're calling me every day and showing up at my house uninvited. No, I need to set a boundary. Okay, I said I was going to be there for a friend, but now they're using me instead of their therapist. No, I need to set the boundary, right? So setting healthy boundaries in relationships and prioritizing your own well-being can help you recover from the fear of loss of love of somebody, and in the process help recover from burnout and avoid it completely in some spaces. Yes, June, welcome, long time. Number 4 is developing a supportive network of friends and family who validate and support you. I'm just going to leave it there because I mentioned that so many times, and pretty much everything is related to this. Who do you have around you? Who can you rely on? Who do you trust? Who have you built deep connections with and relations with? Who can you be silent with? Who can you come to when you're in trouble? Who do you feel supported by the most? Those people, keep them close and treat them so they know who they are, right? If you were to call your friends right now, would they be able to say, yes, I think I'm a person that they trust? Or do you trust them in silence? Let them know. Let them know, I appreciate you. I know I can rely on you and it's not going unnoticed. And I just want you to know that I want to be there for you as well. So if there's anything I can do, let me know. Let them know, communicate that, build that supportive network. Let it be two-way. You have your strengths, they have your strengths. What you are to them may not be what they are to you, but lean on your own strengths. You might have the logical frame of mind. So whenever they're in trouble, they can come with you for solutions. There might be the emotional frame of mind. So you come to them for support and emotional, acknowledgement when you need to cry, when you need a hug, for example, right? And you can learn from each other in the process. You can form a team, that interdependence as a unit, whether you're friends, family, partner, colleagues, whatever it is, it can work the same way. Develop a supportive network. So number 5 is engage in activities that bring you joy and fulfillment outside of relationships. One of the things I found as you grow up, you tend to prioritize all the things that are quote unquote serious, the things that bring you money, the things that we're told that aren't childish. But then what ends up happening is if you remove the joy, it only gives space to more sadness, anger, and all those kind of things. There's nothing to counter those emotions. Joy is important. And I feel like demonizing joy does not serve us in any way, shape, or form. So engage in activities that bring you joy. Go rock climbing, go mountain climbing, listen to your music, dance in the rain, jump in the puddle, go to the theme park, take yourself out for a dinner, like all kinds of things that you used to do in partnership. If you want to know what brings you joy, think about the last time you laughed. And even as a question, think about it. When was the last time you laughed, like fully? When was the last time you laughed uncontrollably? For some of us, it's been way too long, way too long. And there's actual physiological things that happen with laughter. It releases the endorphin, the dopamine, which is the feel-good hormone, which can actually counter a lot of the cortisol, the stress hormones that are in your body. We need to laugh, right? And you can feel it if you go to a comedy show. They lead you down this dark road of a joke, this build-up. And then when you get the laugh, you get this release. You're crying with laughter and you feel good. You feel light afterwards, almost tired from how light you feel, right? When was the last time you laughed? Think about it. If it's been too long, what can you do to bring it back? What can you do to bring joy back into your life and fulfillment outside of relationships? What can you do? If your entire life is based around your relationship and that's enough, then that's great. But for many of us, there might be things that you as an individual need that you can't get from the relationship. Let's say, for example, I'm really into architecture. I want to go to a architecture fair, right? And my partner isn't interested in that. Does that mean I don't go? If it's something that brings me joy and I'm watching these things come up in my email list, oh my gosh, yeah, the convention is this year, but no, they will never want to go. So then I don't go. I deny myself of that, right? And there's a few things that happen. One, it might be that I brought them once and they didn't like it. Or two, I asked them if they wanted to come and they said no. And then there's something that happens in relationship where you feel like, oh, if they don't say yes, then it means neither of us can do it. Let's get rid of that right now. If that's the case, then you're hurtling towards an issue that's going to happen at some point in time. I feel like some of the best relationships are maintained because there is a certain level of independence still, right? What are the things that bring you joy? You go out and get that and bring that energy back into the relationship. So in this case, I might have a group of old colleagues who want to go to that convention. I'll go with them. Or a friend of mine who's really into architecture. I'll go with them. I'll have a ball, a blast. I'll be looking at all the different materials and stuff. It's like, oh my gosh, look at this tiling. Oh my gosh, look at this new material. It's like exothermic or endothermic, and it's really great for these kind of climates and all this kind of stuff. And I'll be like bringing that energy, and I'll get my little goodie bags of little treats and stuff and business cards. And I'll come back and stuff and be like, babe, you never guess what? I had such a great time. I saw this. And in 20 minutes, I'll be able to unload and bring all this energy to my partner. And they could be like, oh my gosh, that's great. I'm so glad you went there because now we need to do some stuff in the house, right? Or whatever it might be. But instead of having 8 hours where that person would have been depressed or angry or feel like they don't want to be there, instead they get 20 minutes of your joy. Yeah. And in the time that you were away, they maybe had the space to do whatever they need to do as well, right? So we need to engage in activities that bring joy and a fulfillment outside of relationships and keep those. Those are the things that are going to keep us happy. Obviously, when there's bringing joy within the relationship is important as well. But if there's spaces for joy anywhere within or without the relationship, it's important to maintain that if we want to keep ourselves away from burnout. Because I'm realizing the more I work with people, the one of the strongest things against burnout is actually joy. It's not just having space. It's not just taking time off. It's actually joy. What can you bring to shift your energy into a space where you have capacity for the things that are on your plate, right? Sometimes you need to break that cycle, and joy does that. Laughter does that. And last on the list, on things you can do to fight against fear of loss of love of or from someone, is challenge your negative beliefs about your worth and cultivate a sense of self-love and acceptance. I think I told you all before that one of my therapists once said, if you were to take away all the things that you've done, all the things that you do, will the person that's left be enough for you? And really, that was a question of self-acceptance. Do I accept myself as I am without all the bells and whistles? And that for me was a huge question. It was one I really had to take a walk and kind of reflect on. Are you enough for you? Do you believe in yourself? Who do you consider yourself to be at the heart of it all? You know, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Who have you always been? You know, what is the one unchanging element about you? What is the, you know, what three things would be able to describe you? If I was to ask all your friends and family, what three things would they say to describe you? What are the things you think would come up all the time? What are the things that they observe that you don't observe about yourself? Who are you? And do you accept that person? Because until you do, you might be fighting against yourself in all kinds of different ways. Just open my eyes and saw the notification. You just jump straight in. These have been so thought-provoking this week. I'm glad. And they're going to be carrying on. Like I'm forming these into my routine, because I think by doing these, it helps me get to a state where actually, no, I can share, I can document, but then also I can help people, because not everyone is ready for a coach. And for those of you who are, I offer packages. I actually have it's 3,000 for 12 weeks, but I'm doing them at 2,000 for the first 5 people. So if there's something you're genuinely going through that you need help with, whether it's burnout, whether it's clarity of your mission and all that kind of stuff, then I can do sessions like this with you one-to-one, and those are my rates. So if there's something you need, send me a DM. usually offer like a taster session where we'll sit for half an hour and we'll talk through whatever it is you're going through. And then if there's something I can do to help, I'll help you within that session. If there's stuff that you still need help with, then we can talk about you becoming a client of mine. So, and in the meantime, for those of you who aren't ready for that yet, then I'm doing these because I still want to help people, you know. So I'm putting in funding for the DYCP with Arts Council, working on my applications. Definitely need to have that. Yeah, definitely. Let me know. Let me know. And I've done the DYCP before. It's a great support. And one of the things that's really important, which I'm glad you've mentioned this, is I actually, the therapy I did actually was from the DYCP, I think. Was it the DYCP? It was some funding I got, and I ended up using pretty much all of it for therapy and coaching, and therapy, coaching, and mentorship. I think I ended up doing it for. Initially, I was going to do it for all these books and all these events and all that kind of stuff, but I ended up being able to get half of that for free. So I ended up getting all these memberships, etc., because I spoke to the people, which is another thing, right? So one of the things that we can sometimes have is fear of rejection. And if we have fear of rejection, we don't put ourselves into those states to get the things we actually want. And I realized by getting all this support from people, I actually grew confident enough to do things that I wasn't confident to do before. So I would go to people who are at the top of their game and be like, can I take you for coffee? And I just want to ask you 3 questions. Or I came up with this thought and I want to see what you think about it. Or I know you have memberships, but do you have any space left? You know, and just speaking to people. And I found that doors started to open when I started to do that. But it only happened because I was able to deal with my fear of rejection, deal with my fear of acceptance, deal with my fear of lack of validation and all that kind of stuff. And I became able to step out onto ways that would serve me. Yeah, definitely. We'll talk. We'll talk. Absolutely. 100%. But yeah, I'm glad to hear it because not everyone does that. I think people often use DYCP for a project. Here's one thing, and this is ties up to burnout, right? Doing the DYC application, for those of you who aren't aware, I'm a dancer as well as a coach, right? So for the last 15 years or so, I've built a professional dance career, and it culminated in dance theater. And so I would create theater productions, and specifically in Sierra Leone, but I'm trying to bring it back to UK now. And the DYCP is Develop Your Creative Practice Fund by the Arts Council. And in it, they are very specific that it needs to benefit you and not a project necessarily. So it needs to be on your personal development. One of the things I found really hard about the application, I had to do like 3 revisions, and I was working with someone called who was then called Emily Labhart. She's got married now. Phenomenal bid writer. And one of the things that was a real struggle for me was to do an application for something that was just going to benefit me. And when I tell you, I know it sounds really simple, really stupid, but I've always put everyone else above me. And so writing an application which was just for me was actually really difficult. I found myself asking for things like, you know, space so I can do projects or to coach people and stuff or whatever. And they kept coming back to me. It's like, yeah, but this is benefiting other people. What do you want to benefit you? It's like, oh, okay, no, I get it. Okay, cool. Well, if I get you know, access to a space to train and do a, you know, work with my team or whatever, it's like, no, you mentioned team, this is about you. All that kind of stuff. I really couldn't get my head out of thinking about someone else, and I really had to reflect on that in therapy, which is one of the things that came up. It's like, you know, where does that come from? You know, where does that need for other people come from? It's obviously a blessing, but it can actually be a curse. And when it comes from the fear of, right now, today, we're talking about the fear of loss of love of someone. If you have that need, if it goes from a want to a need, and you need it, and it becomes almost toxic, then it's something that needs to be looked at. You know, it might not be serving you in the long run. And so I'm great to hear you using that fund for that purpose. And for anybody else as well, think about what you need. Is it validation? Is it support? Is it a hug? Is it solutions? Is it vision? Is it clarity? Is it to know that you are loved? Is it to know that you're wanted? And how can you do that for yourself first? Before you start looking at getting it from other people, how can you get those things for yourself? That is the foundation of self-love. For example, if it's acceptance you're looking for, if it's validation you're looking for, if it's love you're looking for, how can you create that for yourself before you start looking to get it from other people? There was a friend of mine who said they don't want to pour from the cup, they want to pour from the saucer. So the thing about pouring from your cup is that you have to replenish that. If you pour from the saucer, you're pouring from your overflow, which means that you can always pour from while remaining full. And so it was really upon reflection, it was something that was really significant for me as a concept, pouring from the saucer and not feeling guilty about that. If you're from a stage where if pouring into someone else means that you will be empty, maybe consider how else you can support them. Maybe there's another way to support them which won't deplenish you to that extent. Maybe there's someone else who has more capacity. Maybe they need professional support. Definitely internal before external. Pour from the saucer, not the cup. Right? So I hope this has been helpful to you. Thank you for the engagement. And if there are any questions, let me know. What I'm trying to do is I do these lives in the morning, and this is like the long form content, right? And I give myself up to an hour to talk about a topic. I'm trying, it's funny, right? There's an element of me which is trying to keep it short, but usually when I start, it starts thinking about all this other stuff that's attached, and then my own personal experiences come out, which I feel like I sometimes need to share so people know that I too go through stuff. But then there's also short form content. So if you're on Instagram, if you're on LinkedIn, if you're on YouTube, there are also going to be shorts where I'm going to take clips of these. So you can just take bite-sized little bits, because I know not everyone always has like an hour or so or 30 minutes to spare. But if there's something you want me to cover, let me know. And if there's help you need, let me know. If you're going to a stage where you've tried all this stuff before and for some reason you still find yourself into a cycle, give me a shout. Like I said, I offer taster sessions, which are just 30 minutes, where I'll sit with you and we'll treat it like a normal session. About 20 minutes will be treated like a normal session with me, like a laser coaching session. And then the last 10 minutes will be looking at what we can do moving forward, like what support you need. If we haven't got to solve the problem yet, is it that you want to become part of membership that I'm starting up soon, which is relatively low ticket? Is it that you want one-to-one support, which is relatively high ticket? Is it something in between that I haven't thought of before? If there's some kind of support you need, then we can talk about that within that last 10 minutes. Yeah. So tomorrow, let's see what we're covering tomorrow. Tomorrow is the fear of old age. And this is something where I feel like I feel like changing the title a little bit. I know Napoleon Hill said fear of old age, but I think really it's the fear of time and losing time, feeling like I've missed the opportunity and it may not come again. Or old age as well, like you're physically not in a position to be able to do the things you used to do when you were young. You're losing strength, you're using your cognitive function, you're using your control of your body and things like that. We'll talk about that tomorrow, but I may change it. It might be fear of time. I think time encompasses a lot wider of an issue than just old age. Yeah, like, so for example, have I missed the opportunity to go back to learn or to pivot, for example? And if you have that fear, you end up staying in the same place that you don't actually want to be in. So yeah, we're going to be looking at that tomorrow. Yes, Pearl, happy early birthday. All right, so thank you everyone. I'm coming up to 50 minutes, which is incredibly much longer than I expected to be. Like I said, if you have any questions, put them in the comments. If you have any thoughts or reflections after you watch this, put them in the comments. If you want to speak about having a 30-minute session with me, which is going to be like a free taster session of how I work as a coach, then book that or DM me. And if you have any suggestions of topics you want me to cover, just put it in the comments or DM me as well. Okay. Thank you everyone for coming. I'll see you again tomorrow morning around 7 a.m. I'm going to try and keep it to 7 a.m. My 6 a.m. was just too early. It's going to be 7 from now on. And I'll see you then. You're welcome, Ricardo. And we need to catch up. I need to come to Portugal or something like that. We need to catch up for all. Okay. Have an amazing day, everyone.